The March afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Reynolds mansion in Westchester County, casting long shadows across imported Italian marble floors. Sophie Reynolds knelt on the cold bathroom tile, her small arms trembling as she held her 3-year-old brother Jake against her chest. The little boy whimpered softly, his tiny fingers clutching the worn fabric of Sophie's faded pink dress. "Shh, Jake," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her cherubic face. "Please don't cry. She'll get angrier." Standing over them, her 4-inch Louboutin heels clicking menacingly against the tile, stood Olivia Reynolds, 31 years old, blonde hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a crimson designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her ice blue eyes narrowed as she pointed a manicured finger at the toilet bowl. I said, "Scrub it with your bare hands, you filthy little creature," Olivia hissed, her beautiful face contorted with disgust. "And if that brat drops even one tear on my floor, you'll clean every bathroom in this house tonight." Sophie's thin arms burned from holding 30-pound Jake, but she didn't dare set him down. The last time she had Olivia had locked him in the dark linen closet for an hour. The memory of his terrified scream still haunted Sophie's dreams. "Please, I can't hold him and clean at the same time," Sophie pleaded, her voice cracking. "My arms hurt." Olivia's laugh was cold and sharp. Your arms hurt, you ungrateful little parasite. Do you know how lucky you are to live in this house, to eat the food I provide? Your pathetic mother is dead. And if it weren't for me marrying your father, you'd be in some filthy orphanage." The mention of her mother, Catherine Reynolds, who had died just 11 months ago in what was ruled a tragic car accident, made Sophie's chest tighten with grief so profound it physically hurt. She had been only 4 when she lost the only person who had truly loved her. "Mama," Jake whimpered, reaching his chubby hands toward Sophie's face, trying to wipe away her tears with his tiny fingers. At 3 years old, Jake had no real memories of Catherine. She had died when he was barely 2. But he'd learned the word from Sophie's stories about the kind woman who used to read to them. "Don't you dare call her that," Olivia sneered, crouching down to their eye level, her perfume overwhelming in its intensity. "Catherine Reynolds is dead and buried. I'm the only mother in this house now, and you'd better learn to respect me." William Reynolds' key turned in the front door at precisely 2:47 p.m. He loosened his Tom Ford tie and set down his briefcase, noting the unusual silence in the house. Normally, their housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would greet him, but she was conspicuously absent. He didn't know Olivia had given the entire staff the afternoon off. She always did when she planned her discipline sessions. "Olivia," William called out, his deep voice echoing through the marble foyer. "Sophie, Jake." Upstairs, Olivia's head snapped toward the bathroom door, her eyes widening with panic for just a moment before her expression hardened. She grabbed Sophie's shoulder roughly, her nails digging into the child's thin flesh. "Not a word," she whispered viciously. "If you say anything to your father, I'll make sure Jake suffers for it. Do you understand me?" Sophie nodded frantically, clutching Jake tighter as the little boy began to cry in earnest, now sensing the fear radiating from his sister. William Reynolds climbed the grand staircase, following the sound of his son's crying. His polished Oxford shoes moved silently across the plush carpet of the second-floor hallway. At 52, the CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals still maintained the athletic physique of his younger days, though his once jet-black hair was now salted with distinguished gray at the temples. As he approached the guest bathroom, he heard his wife's voice, but there was a tone to it he'd never heard before, something cold and cruel that made his blood run cold. "Stop that crying this instant, or I'll give you something to really cry about." William pushed open the bathroom door, and the scene before him seemed to unfold in slow motion. His beautiful wife, whom he'd married just 7 months after Catherine's death, a decision made in desperate grief and loneliness, stood over his children. Sophie, his precious 5-year-old daughter, with her mother's warm brown eyes and chestnut hair, was on her knees on the hard tile floor, her small body shaking as she held his young son. Her hands were red and raw, and there was a cleaning brush and harsh chemicals beside her. Jake's face was blotchy and tear-stained, his little body convulsing with frightened sobs. "What the hell is going on here?" William's voice was quiet, but there was a dangerous edge to it that made Olivia take an involuntary step backward. Olivia's transformation was instantaneous and remarkable. The cruel twist to her lips vanished, replaced by a practiced expression of concerned motherhood. She placed a hand over her heart, and manufactured tears sprang to her eyes with impressive speed. "William, thank God you're home," she said, her voice quavering. I've been trying to teach Sophie some responsibility. She made such a terrible mess in here earlier, and I thought it would be good for her to learn to clean up after herself. But she's been so defiant and poor, Jake got upset watching his sister be so disobedient. William looked at his daughter, who had gone completely still, her eyes downcast, her whole body radiating fear. This wasn't defiance, this was terror. "Sophie," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Look at me, sweetheart." Slowly his daughter raised her eyes to meet his. What he saw there broke something fundamental inside him. There was no light in those eyes, no spark of the joyful child he remembered from before Catherine's death. These were the eyes of someone who had learned not to hope for rescue. "Daddy," she whispered. And in that single word, William heard a universe of pain. He reached out carefully and lifted Jake from her arms. The 3-year-old immediately clutched at his father's suit jacket, burying his face in William's shoulder. Then William noticed something that made his jaw clench. There were small bruises on Jake's upper arms, finger-shaped bruises that were a few days old, yellowing at the edges. "How did Jake get these bruises?" William asked, his voice deadly calm as he turned to Olivia. "He's a toddler, William," Olivia said with an exasperated laugh that sounded almost genuine. "He bumps into things constantly. You know how clumsy children are at that age." But William had raised Sophie from birth to age 4 before Catherine died. He knew what normal toddler bruises looked like. And these weren't them. These were grip marks from adult fingers. He looked back at Sophie, who was still kneeling on the floor, her raw hands clasped in front of her. "Sophie, honey, I need you to tell Daddy the truth. Did Olivia hurt you or Jake?" The 5-year-old's eyes darted to Olivia, who stood behind William now, her face a mask of concern, but her eyes sending Sophie a clear message: lie or Jake pays. I was bad, Daddy," Sophie whispered, her voice so small it was almost inaudible. "I made a mess. Olivia was just teaching me to be better." William felt something inside him crack. His daughter was protecting herself and her brother in the only way she knew how, by accepting blame she didn't deserve. How long had this been going on? How had he been so blind? He stood still, holding Jake, and turned to face his wife. "Olivia, I think you should pack some things and stay at your mother's for a few days while I figure this out." Olivia's carefully constructed facade began to slip. "You're choosing to believe a 5-year-old's lies over your wife, William. I've been nothing but devoted to these children since we married. After Catherine died, who stepped up, who has been here every single day, taking care of them while you built your empire." "Taking care of them?" William repeated, his voice rising for the first time. "Is that what you call making a kindergartner scrub toilets with her bare hands while holding her baby brother, taking care of them?" "She's manipulating you." Olivia's voice grew shrill. "That little brat has been trying to turn you against me since the day we married. She's jealous, William. She can't accept that Catherine is dead and that I'm your wife now." Sophie flinched at the venom in Olivia's voice, and that small movement told William everything he needed to know. He pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer, Gerald Humphrey, whom he'd known for 20 years. "Gerald, I need you to come to the house immediately," William said, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "Bring a family law specialist with you. I'll be filing for divorce by the end of the week." Olivia's beautiful face transformed into something ugly and hateful. "You'll regret this, William. I'll take you for everything you have. I'll drag your name and your precious company through the mud. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Get out of my house," William said quietly. "Now, before I call the police and have you arrested for child abuse." For a moment, Olivia looked like she might lunge at him, but something in William's expression made her think better of it. Instead, she grabbed her Hermes handbag from the counter and stormed out of the bathroom, her heels clicking violently against the floor. "This isn't over," she shouted from the hallway. "You have no proof of anything, and no judge will believe a child over me." The front door slammed with such force that the chandelier in the foyer swayed. William waited until he heard her car screech out of the driveway before he set Jake down gently and turned to Sophie. He knelt beside his daughter and opened his arms. "Come here, baby girl," he said softly. For several long moments, Sophie didn't move. She just stared at him with those heartbroken eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. Then, like a dam breaking, she launched herself into her father's arms and began to sob deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire tiny frame. William held both his children and wept with them, finally allowing himself to feel the crushing weight of his failure. He had been so consumed with grief over Catherine's death, so focused on drowning himself in work to escape the pain, that he had abandoned his children to a monster. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into Sophie's hair. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Daddy should have been here. Daddy should have protected you." Sophie clung to him with desperate strength, her small body trembling. I tried to be good daddy. I tried so hard, but nothing I did was ever good enough for her. William pulled back just enough to look into his daughter's face. Listen to me, Sophie. None of this was your fault. Do you understand? You didn't do anything wrong. Olivia is a bad person who hurt you, and Daddy is going to make sure she never ever hurts you again. She said if I told she'd hurt Jake worse. Sophie whispered, her eyes welling with fresh tears. I couldn't let her hurt Jake, Daddy. He's just a baby. The protective instinct of a 5-year-old trying to shield her baby brother from abuse was more than William could bear. He gathered both children close again, making a silent vow that would shape every decision for the rest of his life. Nothing, not business, not money, not his own needs, would ever come before his children again. But as he held them, William didn't know that this was just the beginning. The truth about Catherine's death, about Olivia's real motives, and about Sophie's extraordinary secret was about to unravel in ways he could never have imagined. 3 days after Olivia's explosive departure, William sat in his home office watching security footage that made his blood boil. He'd had the entire mansion wired with hidden cameras years ago, a security measure for a man of his wealth, but he'd never bothered to review the recordings. Now, with his head of security beside him, he watched hours of abuse that had been documented in excruciating detail. March 15th, 2:34 p.m., Olivia yanking Sophie by her hair for spilling juice. March 18th, 11:47 a.m., Olivia locking Jake in a closet for crying. March 22nd, 3:15 p.m., Olivia forcing Sophie to stand in a corner for 4 hours without moving. The footage went back months, a horrifying chronicle of systematic cruelty that had escalated over time. William's hands shook as he watched his daughter accept punishment for things she hadn't done, watched her small face grow more defeated with each passing day. There's more, Mr. Reynolds, his security chief Robert Hayes said grimly. The footage from Mrs. Chen's nanny cam. William looked up sharply. Mrs. Chen had a nanny cam. She installed it in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. She was concerned about Mrs. Reynolds' behavior toward the children, but wasn't sure how to approach you. Robert pulled up another video file. This was recorded last Tuesday. On the screen, Olivia stood in the kitchen with someone William didn't recognize, a thin man in his 30s wearing an expensive suit. Their body language was intimate, familiar. Who is that? William demanded. His name is Derek Madison. He's a hedge fund manager. Based on our investigation over the past 72 hours, they've been having an affair for the past 6 months. Robert paused. But that's not the worst part. Listen to what they're saying. Robert turned up the volume and William heard his wife's voice dripping with contempt. The old fool is so buried in work, he doesn't notice anything. Another 18 months, and I'll have positioned everything perfectly. Once the divorce goes through, I'll own half of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. The prenup becomes void after 2 years of marriage. 21 more months, Derek. Just 21 more months of pretending to play stepmother to those brats. Derek's voice responded, what about the investigation into Catherine's accident? I thought you said that was completely buried. Olivia laughed, and the sound made William's skin crawl. Please, the Breakline investigation went nowhere. No evidence, no witnesses, no problem. Catherine Reynolds' tragic death will remain just that, tragic and accidental. William felt the room tilt. What did she just say? Robert's face was grim. I took the liberty of contacting Detective Marcus Wilson, no relation to your housekeeper. He was the investigator on your late wife's accident. He's been waiting in the living room for the past 20 minutes. He said he's always suspected Catherine's death wasn't an accident, but without evidence, his hands were tied. The detective was a weathered man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I want you to know that your wife's case has haunted me for over a year. There were inconsistencies in the brake failure that never quite added up. William felt like he was moving through water. Are you telling me Olivia murdered Catherine? I'm saying there are questions that need answers, Detective Wilson said carefully. With this new evidence, I can reopen the investigation, but I need to warn you, proving what happened will be difficult. Your wife is clearly intelligent and calculating. And if we don't find concrete evidence within 48 hours, the case will be permanently closed due to statute limitations. Over the following week, William barely slept. He moved Sophie and Jake into rooms adjacent to his own master suite. He hired a child psychologist, Dr. Rachel Morgan, who specialized in trauma, and his children really held them for the first time since Catherine's death. Dr. Morgan met with Sophie 4 times in those first 7 days. After the 4th session, she asked to speak with William privately. Your daughter has been through severe psychological trauma, Dr. Morgan said gently. The systematic abuse from Olivia, combined with the loss of her mother, has created a complex trauma response. But there's something else I've noticed, Mr. Reynolds, something quite extraordinary. William leaned forward. What do you mean? Sophie has what we call hyperthymesia, highly superior autobiographical memory. She remembers every single detail of every day of her life with perfect clarity, every conversation, every event, every moment. Dr. Morgan pulled out her notes. I've tested her extensively. She can tell me what she had for breakfast on any given day, what people were wearing, exact conversations. I've never seen a case this pronounced in someone so young. I don't understand. How is that possible? It's extraordinarily rare, fewer than 100 confirmed cases worldwide. But here's what's remarkable in Sophie's case. She remembers the day her mother died with perfect clarity, every detail of that morning, including a conversation she overheard between her mother and Olivia the night before. William felt his heart stop. What conversation? Dr. Morgan hesitated. I think you need to hear it from Sophie herself. But Mr. Reynolds, what your daughter remembers could be crucial evidence in the investigation into your wife's death. And we're running out of time. That evening, William sat with Sophie in her new bedroom. He'd had it completely redecorated in soft pinks and purples, erasing every trace of Olivia's influence. Jake was already asleep in the adjacent room, exhausted from a day of playing in the backyard for the first time in months. Sweetheart, William said gently, holding his daughter's small hand. Dr. Morgan told me you have a very special memory, that you remember things most people forget. Sophie nodded slowly. I remember everything, Daddy. Every single day. Sometimes I wish I could forget. Dr. Morgan said you remember the night before Mommy's accident. Do you think you could tell me what you remember? I know it's hard, baby, but it might be very important. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she accessed memories that were as clear to her as if they had happened yesterday. When she spoke, her voice was eerily adult, the voice of someone recounting facts with perfect precision. It was April 12th last year, a Thursday. Mommy was wearing her blue dress with white flowers. Olivia came to our house at 8:37 p.m. You were still at work. Mommy asked me to go upstairs, but I was thirsty, so I came back down to the kitchen at 8:52 p.m. They were in the living room, and they didn't see me. Sophie closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, William heard his late wife's voice in his mind. Olivia was saying, he's never going to leave you for me while you're alive, Catherine. William loves you too much. But accidents happen all the time, don't they? Brake lines, fail cars, crash. Tragic, but these things happen. William felt the air leave his lungs. What did your mother say? Mommy said, is that a threat, Olivia? Because if it is, I'll make sure William knows exactly what kind of person you are. I know about you and Derek. I know about your gambling debts. I know everything. Sophie opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. Olivia laughed. She said, who do you think he'll believe? His devoted assistant who's been by his side for 3 years, or his paranoid wife who's been acting strange since the baby was born. Then she left at 9:07 p.m. And the next morning, Mommy's car wouldn't start at first. She had to try 3 times. The engine made a funny sound. She looked worried. She kissed me goodbye at 7:42 a.m. She was wearing her gray suit and her pearl necklace. She smelled like lavender. Sophie's voice cracked. At 8:15 a.m., the police came to tell us there had been an accident. Mommy's brakes failed on Highway 287. She hit the guardrail at 73 miles per hour. William pulled his daughter into his arms as she finally began to cry. Not the desperate sobs of someone in acute pain, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who had been carrying an unbearable weight for too long. You've been holding on to this all alone, William whispered. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell the police, Sophie said between tears. But they said I was just a little girl who was confused and sad about her mommy. They said my imagination was trying to make sense of something I didn't understand. The next morning, William arrived at the 42nd Precinct with Sophie, Dr. Morgan, Detective Wilson, and his lawyer Gerald. Sophie, with her extraordinary memory, recounted every detail of that overheard conversation with a precision that stunned everyone in the room. Mr. Reynolds, Detective Wilson said, after Sophie's testimony, combined with the security footage and what your daughter has told us, we have enough to bring Olivia in for questioning. But I need to be honest with you. Proving she tampered with the brakes will be difficult after all this time. We need a confession or physical evidence, and we're down to our last 24 hours before the case is permanently closed. Then we find a way to make her confess, William said quietly. Whatever it takes. Back at the Reynolds mansion, they formulated a plan. William would contact Olivia, claiming he wanted to discuss the divorce terms privately. The mansion would be wired for sound and video, with Detective Wilson and his team monitoring from a nearby location. Sophie and Jake would be safely away from the house with Mrs. Chin. "This is too dangerous," Dr. Morgan objected. "She already killed once. What if she tries to harm you, William?" "She won't," William replied, his voice hard with determination. "She still thinks she can manipulate me, and she's too arrogant to believe I figured it all out." What none of them knew was that Olivia, watching from a distance and growing increasingly desperate, was about to make a catastrophic mistake that would expose everything. But Sophie's memories held one more secret, something she hadn't told anyone yet, something about the morning of Catherine's death that would prove to be the key to everything. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. On a rainy Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Olivia had been served with divorce papers and a restraining order, she violated that order spectacularly by appearing at the Reynolds mansion's gates. William received an alert on his phone from security at 9:23 a.m. The camera showed Olivia's white Mercedes idling at the entrance, her face visible through the windshield. And she wasn't alone. In the passenger seat sat Derek Madison. "Sir, should I call the police?" Robert Hayes asked through the intercom. William looked at Sophie and Jake, who were eating breakfast in the kitchen with Mrs. Chin. The housekeeper had returned to her position, and her presence seemed to bring the children comfort. Sophie was teaching Jake how to spell simple words with alphabet cereal, her patient voice a stark contrast to the haunted child she'd been 2 weeks ago. "No," William said slowly, an idea forming. "Let her in, but Robert, make sure every camera is recording and call Detective Wilson. Tell him to get here fast, but stay out of sight until I give the signal." Gerald, who had taken to practically living at the mansion during this crisis, looked alarmed. "William, that's not wise. She's volatile and unpredictable." "Exactly," William said, "which is why she's going to make a mistake." 15 minutes later, Olivia strode into the mansion's grand foyer like she owned it, Derek trailing behind her, looking significantly less confident. She was dressed immaculately in a black Chanel suit, her hair and makeup perfect, every inch the wounded wife. "William," she called out, her voice echoing off the marble, "we need to talk. This has gone on long enough." William descended the stairs slowly, his face impassive. "You're violating a restraining order, Olivia. I could have you arrested right now." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "This whole thing is ridiculous. You're going to destroy our marriage because of some grainy security footage and the fantasies of a disturbed child." "Disturbed?" William felt his temper flare but kept his voice level. "You abused my daughter. You abused my son. The evidence is overwhelming." "Evidence?" Olivia laughed, but there was a desperate edge to it. "Edited footage and the overactive imagination of a 5-year-old. Any judge will see through this charade." "William, I'm your wife. We took vows. For better or worse, remember." From the top of the stairs, Sophie appeared, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from her mother. Olivia's eyes flicked up to the child, and for just a moment her mask slipped, revealing the cold hatred beneath. "You," Olivia hissed. "Choose your next words very carefully," William interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. Olivia seemed to catch herself, the mask sliding back into place. "I was going to say misunderstood. She's misunderstood, William. She's been through trauma and she's confused. She needs help, professional help, not these ridiculous accusations against me." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go, Vic. This isn't—" "Shut up, Derek," Olivia snapped, then seemed to realize her mistake. "I mean, darling, let me handle this." William raised an eyebrow. "Darling, that's an interesting term for my wife to use with another man." Olivia's jaw tightened. "He's a friend providing support during this difficult time. Unlike you, who believed lies over the woman who stood by your side." "Stood by my side." William felt rage building but channeled it into cold precision. "Is that what you call planning to divorce me the moment our prenup expired? What you call murdering my first wife?" The room went utterly silent. Olivia's face went pale, then flushed red. That's insane. Catherine died in a car accident. Are you so desperate to paint me as a villain that you'd invent conspiracy theories?" "I'm not inventing anything," William said calmly. "Sophie heard you threaten Catherine the night before she died. She remembers every word of your conversation, every detail." Olivia's eyes darted to Sophie, and something ugly twisted her features. "She's 4 years old." "5," William corrected. "And she has hyperthymesia, perfect memory recall. Every conversation, every moment stored with complete accuracy." The child psychologist confirmed it. So did 2 independent neurologists. For the first time, Olivia looked genuinely shaken. Derek took a step backward, his face pale. "Vic, what is he talking about? You said Catherine's death was an accident." It was an accident. Olivia's voice rose to a near shriek. The brakes failed. It was investigated and ruled accidental. Investigated poorly, Detective Wilson said, stepping out from the dining room where he'd been waiting. But thanks to new evidence, we're reopening the case, and thanks to your little visit here today, we now have you on record reacting very interestingly to accusations of murder. Olivia spun around, her eyes wild. You can't prove anything. There's no evidence. It's been over a year. Actually, Sophie's small voice came from the stairs, clear and steady. There is evidence. Every eye in the room turned to the 5-year-old standing on the stairs, holding her rabbit, looking far older than her years. What did you see, sweetheart? William asked gently. After the police left, after they told us about Mommy's accident, Olivia came to the house. She was there at 9:47 a.m. She hugged you, Daddy, and said she was so sorry. But when she walked past the garage, I was sitting on the steps. She didn't know I could see her. She looked at Mommy's toolbox on the shelf, and she smiled. Then she took something from her purse. It was small and silver, like a bottle, and she wiped it very carefully with a cloth and put it back in the toolbox. She put it behind the wrenches in the back corner. Detective Wilson was already pulling out his phone. I'm getting a warrant for that toolbox right now. Olivia's face had gone from red to deathly pale. She's making it up. She's a child. Children confuse memories. Children with hyperthymesia don't confuse anything, Dr. Morgan said, stepping out from another room. I've tested Sophie extensively. Her recall is 100% accurate for every event we've been able to verify. If she says she saw you put something in that toolbox, she saw it. Derek was backing toward the door now. I don't know anything about this. Olivia, I swear you told me it was an accident. You knew enough, William said coldly. You knew she was planning to take half my company. You knew she was counting down the days until the prenup expired. What else did you know, Mr. Madison? I want a lawyer, Derek said, his voice shaking. Smart choice, Detective Wilson replied. You're going to need one. Olivia stood frozen in the center of the foyer, her perfect composure finally shattering. Her hands were shaking, her breathing rapid. There's no way you can prove, even if something's in that toolbox, it doesn't mean what? William asked quietly. It doesn't mean you sabotaged Catherine's brakes, that you murdered the mother of my children so you could take her place and eventually take my money. What exactly doesn't it mean, Olivia? I loved you. Olivia suddenly screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I loved you for 3 years. While I was your assistant, I watched you with Catherine, and it was supposed to be me. I deserved to be Mrs. William Reynolds. I deserved this house, this life, not some boring housewife who didn't even appreciate what she had. The confession hung in the air like poison. Derek made a strangled sound and bolted for the door. Detective Wilson's backup officers who had been waiting outside intercepted him immediately. William felt something cold settle in his chest. You killed her because you wanted her life. She had everything. Olivia's voice broke. You loved her. The children adored her. Everyone thought she was so perfect. But I was the one who stood by you at the office. I was the one who understood your business. I was the one who should have been your wife from the beginning. So you killed her? William repeated, his voice hollow. You murdered the mother of my child and then tortured that same child for nearly a year. Olivia seemed to realize what she'd just admitted. Her eyes widened and she looked around wildly as if searching for an escape route. I didn't mean... You don't understand what it was like. You're right, William said. I don't understand murdering an innocent person. I don't understand abusing children. And I'll never understand how I was fool enough to marry a monster. I want my lawyer, Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm not saying anything else. You've already said enough, Detective Wilson replied, pulling out handcuffs. Olivia Reynolds, you're under arrest for the suspected murder of Catherine Reynolds and for child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Olivia her rights, Sophie descended the stairs slowly. She walked right up to her stepmother, looked up at her with those clear brown eyes, Catherine's eyes, and said quietly, My mommy was a good person. She didn't deserve what you did to her, and Jake and I didn't deserve what you did to us, but it's over now. You can't hurt us anymore. Olivia looked down at the 5-year-old, and for just a moment something like shame flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. You're just like her, self-righteous and... Don't finish that sentence, William warned, stepping between Olivia and his daughter. Don't even think it. As the police led Olivia away, her screams of protest fading down the driveway, William knelt and gathered both his children into his arms. Mrs. Chen had brought Jake downstairs, and the 3-year-old seemed to sense something important had happened. Is the bad lady gone? Jake asked in his tiny voice. Yes, buddy, William said, his voice thick with emotion. The bad lady is gone, and she's never coming back. Sophie looked up at her father with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. Daddy, is Mommy proud of me for remembering, for telling the truth even though it was scary? William felt tears stream down his face. Your mommy is so proud of you, Sophie, so incredibly proud. You were so brave, sweetheart. You protected your brother and you helped catch the person who hurt your mommy. You're a hero. I just wanted her to be safe, Sophie whispered. I wanted to save Mommy, but I was too little to understand what I heard. If I had been smarter— No, William said firmly. You were 4 years old. You did nothing wrong. Nothing about any of this was your fault. Do you understand me? Later that afternoon, Detective Wilson called with news. They had found the evidence in Catherine's toolbox, a small bottle of brake fluid and a siphoning tool, both wiped clean but missed during the original investigation because they had seemed like ordinary garage items. More importantly, Derek Madison, facing charges as an accessory, was singing like a canary. He had detailed knowledge of Olivia's plan, including her research into brake tampering and her timeline for the murder. The case was solid. Olivia would spend the rest of her life in prison. That evening, as William tucked Sophie into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. Daddy, why didn't I forget? Why do I have to remember every bad thing that ever happened? William smoothed her hair back from her forehead. Dr. Morgan says that sometimes our brains are special in ways we don't expect. Your memory is a gift, Sophie, even when it doesn't feel like one. Because of your gift, we caught the person who hurt Mommy. Because of your gift, we stopped Olivia from hurting other people. That's pretty amazing for a 5-year-old. Will I always remember everything? Sophie asked, her eyes searching his face, even the bad stuff with Olivia. You probably will, William admitted. But you know what else you'll remember? Every good moment from now on. Every happy day, every laugh, every time Daddy tells you he loves you. Those memories will be just as perfect and clear as the difficult ones. And over time there will be so many more happy memories that the sad ones won't hurt as much. Sophie considered this. Promise? I promise, William said. And there's something else, sweetheart. I'm not going back to the office for a while. I'm going to stay home with you and Jake. We're going to make lots of new happy memories together. Really? Sophie's face lit up with hope that William hadn't seen since before Catherine's death. Really? He confirmed, you and Jake are the most important things in the world to me. I forgot that for a while, and I'm so sorry, but I'm never forgetting it again. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, William sat beside her bed and watched his daughter's face relax into peaceful dreams. He thought about Catherine, about the woman he'd loved and lost, about how she would feel knowing their daughter had been the one to bring her killer to justice. And he made another vow. Sophie's extraordinary gift would never be exploited or burdened. He would protect both his children, give them the childhood they deserved, and make sure they knew every single day that they were loved beyond measure. What William didn't know yet was that Sophie's hyperthymesia would lead to an even more remarkable discovery, one that would change not just their lives, but potentially thousands of others. 3 months after Olivia's arrest, life at the Reynolds mansion had transformed into something William barely recognized, but in the best possible way. The dark, silent halls that had echoed with fear now rang with children's laughter. Sophie had gained 12 pounds. Her cheeks had color again, and most remarkably, she smiled, not the careful, fearful smile she'd given Olivia, but genuine, joyful grins that reminded William so much of Catherine it sometimes took his breath away. Jake, now 3.5, followed his sister everywhere like a devoted shadow. Sophie was his favorite word, and he refused to go to sleep unless she read him a story first. The bond between the siblings had deepened into something beautiful and unbreakable. But on a crisp October morning, something happened that would change everything. Sophie was in the mansion's library, a room she'd claimed as her sanctuary, surrounded by books that most 6-year-olds wouldn't attempt for another decade. She was reading a medical journal that William had left on his desk, one discussing Alzheimer's disease and memory disorders. Mrs. Chen found her there at 10:23 a.m., completely absorbed. Sophie, honey, Mrs. Chen said gently. That's very advanced reading. Do you understand what it says? Sophie looked up, her brown eyes thoughtful. Most of it. It's about people who lose their memories when they get older. Their brains forget how to make new memories, and then they start forgetting old ones too. She paused. Mrs. Chen, if I can remember everything, could my brain help people who can't remember anything? The housekeeper smiled indulgently. That's a sweet thought, dear, but that's not really how medicine works. Sophie returned to the journal, but the question lingered in her mind with the same perfect clarity that every thought in her extraordinary brain possessed. The Memory Protector. Part 2. That evening, William sat with Sophie in her favorite spot in the library and told her about his conversation with Mrs. Chin. "Sweetheart, Mrs. Chin told me you asked an interesting question today about your memory helping people with Alzheimer's." Sophie nodded, setting aside the book about birds she'd been reading to Jake before his bedtime. "I read in your journal that people with Alzheimer's forget things because their brain connections break, but my brain connections are really strong. That's why I remember everything." William sat back looking at his daughter with new eyes. At 6 years old, most children were learning to read simple books. Sophie was already connecting complex medical concepts with her own condition. "And you thought maybe studying your brain could help fix other people's brain connections?" "Yes." Sophie's voice was earnest, her eyes wide. "If doctors could figure out what makes my connections so strong, maybe they could help people whose connections are breaking." William felt a lump in his throat. The scientific reasoning was shockingly sound for a kindergartner, and the compassion behind it was pure Catherine. He'd been so focused on protecting Sophie from further trauma that he hadn't considered her extraordinary gift might have a purpose beyond bringing Olivia to justice. "That's an incredibly thoughtful idea, Sophie, but studying your brain would mean a lot of tests, probably MRIs and other scans. It might be scary or uncomfortable." Sophie's expression didn't waver. "Mommy used to say that if you can help people, you should, even if it's hard, even if you're scared." Her eyes met her father's. "I can help people, Daddy. I know I can. My brain is different for a reason." 3 weeks later, on a gray November morning, William found himself at Columbia University Medical Center with Sophie meeting with Dr. Patricia Morales, one of the world's leading neuroscientists specializing in memory disorders. Dr. Morgan had made the introduction, and Dr. Morales had been intrigued enough to clear her schedule. The neuroscientist was a tall woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She knelt to Sophie's level in her office, which was filled with brain models and research papers. "Sophie, Dr. Morgan tells me you have an extraordinary memory and that you want to help us understand it better. Is that right?" Sophie nodded. "I remember everything that's ever happened to me. Every day, every conversation, every moment. Dr. Morgan says it's called hyperthymesia, and there are only a few dozen people in the world who have it." "That's exactly right," Dr. Morales said. "And you think studying your brain might help us understand memory loss?" "I think my brain might show you what healthy memory connections look like," Sophie said with careful precision. "If you can see what makes my connections so strong, maybe you can figure out how to make other people's connections strong again when they start to break." Dr. Morales looked at William with barely concealed amazement. "Mr. Reynolds, your daughter has just articulated the fundamental principle behind comparative neuroscience, and she's 6 years old, and she understands research methodology better than some of my graduate students." Over the next 3 months, Sophie underwent extensive testing, all voluntary, all carefully explained to her beforehand, and all stopped immediately if she showed any distress. William was present for every appointment, ensuring his daughter's comfort and safety. The results were staggering. Sophie's brain scans revealed neural connectivity that Dr. Morales had never seen before. The hippocampus, the brain's memory center, showed activity patterns that were 400% more robust than normal. The connections between neurons were not just stronger, they were structured differently, creating redundant pathways that ensured no memory was ever truly lost. "It's like her brain has built a superhighway system where most people have country roads," Dr. Morales explained to William in her office one February afternoon. "Every experience creates multiple strong pathways, which is why she can access memories with such perfect clarity." "Can this help Alzheimer's patients?" William asked. Dr. Morales' eyes lit up. "Potentially, yes. If we can understand the mechanism that makes Sophie's neural pathways so resilient, we might be able to develop treatments that strengthen pathways in patients before they degenerate. It could be revolutionary." But then came the discovery that changed everything. During one of the routine scans in early March, Dr. Morales noticed something unusual in Sophie's cerebrospinal fluid markers. She ran the test 3 more times to be certain, then called an emergency meeting with William. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to show you something," Dr. Morales said, her voice tight with excitement. "Sophie's brain produces an abnormally high level of a protein we call neurotrophin 7. It's a compound we knew existed but thought was relatively inactive in humans." William frowned. "Is that dangerous?" "Dangerous? No, it's miraculous." Dr. Morales pulled up a series of brain scans on her computer. Neurotrophin 7 appears to actively repair and strengthen neural connections. In Sophie's brain, it's constantly maintaining and reinforcing her memory pathways. But here's where it gets extraordinary. Dr. Morales leaned forward, her voice dropping as if sharing a sacred secret. We isolated the protein and tested it in vitro on neural cells from Alzheimer's patients. These are diseased neurons damaged by Alzheimer's plaques. She pulled up a video of cells under a microscope. Now watch what happens when we introduce Sophie's neurotrophin 7. On the screen, the damaged neural connections began to regenerate slowly at first, then with increasing vigor. Broken pathways reformed. Dead-looking cells showed renewed activity. William stared at the screen in disbelief. You're telling me my daughter's brain produces a compound that can reverse Alzheimer's damage? I'm telling you that Sophie might be the key to curing one of the most devastating diseases in modern medicine, Dr. Morales said, her voice shaking with emotion. If we can synthesize neurotrophin 7, if we can replicate what her brain does naturally, we could help millions of people. William felt a strange mix of pride, hope, and fear. What would this mean for Sophie? Would the world see her as a miracle, a curiosity, or worse, a resource to be exploited? How do we proceed without turning my daughter into a lab specimen? She's already been through so much. Dr. Morales nodded in understanding. Sophie's well-being comes first, always. We'll move at her pace with her full understanding and consent at every step, and we'll keep this discovery confidential until we've developed a synthetic version of the protein. Sophie doesn't need to become the face of this research. That evening, William sat Sophie down in her favorite spot in the library and told her what Dr. Morales had discovered. Sophie listened with her characteristic intense focus, processing every word. When William finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So my brain makes something that can help people not forget. Yes, sweetheart, your brain makes something very, very special. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Mommy would be happy. She always said everyone has a purpose. Maybe this is mine. William pulled his daughter close, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. His 6-year-old child who had survived abuse, who had solved her mother's murder, who carried the weight of remembering every painful moment of her young life, was offering her extraordinary gift to help strangers she would never meet. You don't have to do this, Sophie, William said gently. Dr. Morales says they'll need to do more tests, take more samples. It's a lot to ask of anyone, especially someone so young. Sophie pulled back and looked at her father with absolute certainty. Daddy, I remember what it was like when Olivia hurt us. I remember every single second of being scared and alone. I remember every time Jake cried and I couldn't help him. I wouldn't wish those memories on anyone, but I have them and I can't forget them. She took a deep breath. But if I can use my different brain to help people keep their good memories, memories of people they love, happy times, important moments, then something good comes from me being different. Mommy's death, Olivia's abuse, all the bad things. Maybe they happened so I could help people now. William felt tears streaming down his face. When did you get so wise? I've been thinking about it since I was 4, Sophie said simply. I remember. The next 18 months became a whirlwind of research, discovery, and transformation. Sophie, now 7 years old and in 2nd grade, split her time between being a regular kid and being what Dr. Morales called the most important research participant in modern neuroscience. William restructured his work schedule, delegating many of his CEO responsibilities to his executive team so he could be present for Sophie and Jake. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals began quietly funding Dr. Morales' research, creating a dedicated lab for the development of synthetic neurotrophin 7. But success came with challenges that William hadn't anticipated. In May, 2 years after Olivia's imprisonment, the research began to leak to the media. Someone at Columbia they never discovered who tipped off a science journalist about the miracle child whose brain might cure Alzheimer's. The story exploded. Within a week, the Reynolds mansion was besieged by reporters, desperate families with Alzheimer's afflicted loved ones, and even protesters who claimed that studying Sophie's brain was exploitative regardless of her willing participation. William stood at his office window on a Tuesday morning watching news vans line the street and felt the familiar surge of protective rage. Sophie was downstairs with Jake trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the stress was showing. She'd had nightmares for 3 consecutive nights, and unlike most children, Sophie would remember those nightmares with perfect clarity forever. We need to shut this down, William told Gerald, who stood beside him. Take Sophie somewhere the press can't find her. Running won't solve this, Dr. Morgan said from across the room. She'd become not just Sophie's therapist, but a trusted family advisor. The story is out. You need to control the narrative before someone else does it for you. Control it how? William demanded. Hold a press conference with my 7-year-old daughter, let them photograph her, scrutinize her, turn her into a spectacle. Dr. Morales, who had come to the mansion for an emergency strategy session, spoke up quietly. What if we let Sophie decide? Everyone turned to look at her. She's the one at the center of this, Dr. Morales continued. And she's brilliant, probably the smartest person in this room, frankly. Why don't we ask her what she thinks we should do?" They found Sophie in the library with Jake. She was reading him a picture book about dinosaurs, her voice patient and warm as she explained what a triceratops ate. Jake, now nearly 5 years old, hung on every word his sister said. When Sophie saw the group of adults enter, she gently closed the book and stood smoothing her yellow dress. Jake immediately grabbed her hand. "You want to talk about the reporters outside?" she said. "It wasn't a question." William nodded. "How did you know?" "I can hear them from here," Sophie said simply, "and Mrs. Chen has been looking worried all morning. Plus, you all have your serious discussion faces on." She paused. "I've been thinking about what to do." "You have?" Dr. Morgan asked, surprised. Sophie nodded. "The reporters want a story about a special kid with a miracle brain. If we hide from them, they'll just make up stories that might not be true. But if we tell them the truth, the real truth, not just the science part, maybe they'll understand." "What truth, sweetheart?" William asked, kneeling to her level. Sophie's expression was far older than her 7 years. "That I'm not a miracle, I'm just different, and being different is hard, but it can also help people. I want to tell them about Mommy and Olivia and why I want to help people remember the people they love." William felt his heart clench. "Sophie, that's your private story. You don't have to share it with the world." "I know," Sophie said, "but maybe it will help other kids who are different feel less alone. And maybe it will make people understand that the research isn't about me being special. It's about using what makes me different to help others." 3 days later, William held a carefully controlled press conference at the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals headquarters. Sophie sat beside him in a simple blue dress, her hair in braids looking impossibly small next to the wall of microphones. William spoke first, providing the basic facts: Sophie's hyperthymesia, her voluntary participation in the research and the discovery of neurotrophin 7. Then with his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder, he turned the microphone over to her. Sophie looked out at the sea of reporters and cameras with remarkable composure. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "My name is Sophie Reynolds. I'm 7 years old, and I remember everything that's ever happened to me since I was born. Most people think that sounds like a superpower, but it's not always good. I remember every sad thing, every scary thing, every time I've been hurt. I can't forget anything, even when I want to." The room was absolutely silent. "When I was little, my mommy died. Then my stepmother hurt me and my brother Jake for a long time. I remember all of that perfectly every moment, but I also remember that my mommy used to say, 'Everyone has a purpose. Everyone can help in some way.' For a long time, I didn't understand what my purpose could be. Why would I have a brain that remembers bad things forever?" Sophie paused, gathering her thoughts with the same precision she'd learned from reading thousands of pages of scientific literature. "Then the doctors found out that my brain makes something that might help people with Alzheimer's disease remember the people they love. And I finally understood. My brain is different for a reason, not a magic reason, not because I'm special, but because maybe what makes me different can help make other people's lives better." She looked directly into the cameras. "There are people out there who are forgetting their children's names, their wedding days, all the happy moments that make life beautiful. If my different brain can help them keep those memories, then all the hard things I remember, all the pain and the fear, they mean something. Something good can come from something bad." A reporter called out, "Sophie, are you scared of the tests and procedures?" Sophie considered this. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I remember that my mommy was brave even when things were hard. And I remember that Dr. Morales and her team are kind and they always explain everything to me. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do important things even when you are scared." Another reporter asked, "What would you say to other children who are different?" Sophie smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her face. "I'd say being different is okay. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes people don't understand, but your differences might be able to help people in ways you can't imagine yet. Don't hide what makes you special. The world needs all kinds of different people." The press conference lasted 30 minutes, and by the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The story that emerged wasn't about a miracle child or a medical spectacle. It was about courage, purpose, and the extraordinary capacity of one little girl to transform personal tragedy into hope for millions. But the most significant moment came after the camera stopped rolling. An elderly woman approached William and Sophie, tears streaming down her face. "My husband has Alzheimer's," she said, her voice breaking. "Last week he forgot my name. We've been married for 53 years, and he looked at me like I was a stranger. If there's any chance your research could help people like him." Sophie stood and walked over to the woman, taking her wrinkled hand in her small one. "What's your husband's name?" "Walter," the woman whispered. Walter Henderson. I'll remember him, Sophie said softly. I'll remember that Walter Henderson has a wife who loves him so much she cried talking about him. And I promise we're working as hard as we can to help people like Walter. The woman knelt down and hugged Sophie, sobbing openly. And Sophie, who remembered every cruel word Olivia had ever said, every moment of fear and pain, hugged her back and let this stranger's grief matter as much as her own. That night, as William tucked Sophie into bed, she asked quietly, "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see what I'm doing?" William smoothed his daughter's hair back from her forehead. "I think if your mother can see us, she's prouder of you than words can express. You took something painful, your extraordinary memory, and you're using it to help people. That's exactly what Catherine would have done." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "I still miss her every day, and I remember her every single second. Is that going to hurt forever?" "I don't know, sweetheart," William admitted. "But I think the pain means the love was real, and that's worth remembering too." Outside, the news vans had finally dispersed. The protesters had been replaced by letters of support that arrived by the thousands. Sophie's story had touched something deep in the collective consciousness, a reminder that purpose could be found in pain, that differences could be gifts, and that even the youngest among us could change the world. But the biggest change was yet to come. 2 years later, on Sophie's 9th birthday, Dr. Morales arrived at the Reynolds mansion with news that would alter the course of medical history. Sophie was in the backyard, with Jake, now nearly 7 years old, teaching him how to identify different types of birds. She had developed a passion for ornithology over the past year and could identify over 200 species by sight and sound, perfectly remembered, of course, from the single afternoon she'd spent reading a bird encyclopedia. "Sophie," William called from the patio, "Dr. Morales is here and she says it's important." Sophie handed her binoculars to Jake and walked to the house with the easy confidence she'd developed over the past 2 years. The frightened, traumatized 5-year-old was gone, replaced by a remarkable young girl who had learned to transform her extraordinary memory from a burden into a purpose. Dr. Morales stood in William's office with a smile that seemed to radiate from her entire body. "Sophie, Mr. Reynolds, I have news. The FDA has just approved the first round of human trials for synthetic neurotrophin 7. Thanks to your participation, we've successfully created a compound that mimics what your brain does naturally." Sophie's eyes widened. "You mean you can give it to people with Alzheimer's in controlled trials?" "Yes," Dr. Morales said, her voice thick with emotion. "The early results from our animal studies have been extraordinary. We've seen memory restoration in mice with induced Alzheimer's-like symptoms, not just halting progression, actual reversal of memory loss." William felt the room tilt. "You're telling us we might actually cure Alzheimer's?" "I'm telling you that Sophie's different brain has given us a roadmap that no one else had. We're years, maybe decades ahead of where we would have been without her contribution. The implications are staggering." Dr. Morales knelt to Sophie's level. "There are people who are going to remember their grandchildren's faces because of you. Families who won't have to watch their loved ones fade away. You did that, Sophie." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with her characteristic intensity. Then she asked, "Can I meet them? The people in the trials?" 3 months later, Sophie stood in a hospital room at Columbia Medical Center holding the hand of 74-year-old Margaret Whitfield. Margaret had been in the early stages of Alzheimer's when she enrolled in the trial. After 3 months of synthetic neurotrophin 7 treatment, her memory tests had improved by 60%. "My dear," Margaret said, her eyes clear and bright in a way her daughter said they hadn't been in years, "do you know what you've given back to me?" Sophie shook her head. "I can remember my granddaughter's wedding last week. I can remember what my husband looked like when we first met. I can remember my daughter's first words." Margaret's voice broke. "I thought those memories were gone forever, but they're coming back slowly, like photographs developing. They're coming back." Sophie smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "I'm so glad, Mrs. Whitfield. Everyone should get to keep their happy memories." "And what about you, sweet girl?" Margaret asked gently. "What memories make you happy?" Sophie thought about this. "I remember my mommy teaching me to read. I remember my daddy coming home early and saving me and Jake. I remember the first time Jake called me Soph. I remember Dr. Morgan teaching me that my different brain was okay. And I'll remember you, Mrs. Whitfield. I'll remember this conversation forever." Over the next year, the trials expanded. 200 patients, 500, 1,000. The results were consistent and remarkable. Synthetic neurotrophin 7 didn't just slow Alzheimer's progression. In early stage patients, it reversed it. Memories that had faded returned. Connections that had broken reformed. The scientific community hailed it as the breakthrough of the century. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, which William had restructured to focus entirely on neurological research, became the most valuable pharmaceutical company in the world overnight. But William donated 90% of the profits to Alzheimer's research and care facilities, establishing the Catherine Reynolds Foundation for Memory Research in his late wife's honor. Sophie, now 10 years old, became the youngest person ever nominated for a Nobel Prize in medicine. The nomination didn't win. The committee felt she was too young, but the recognition brought global attention to hyperthymesia and the potential locked within neurological differences. On the 3rd anniversary of Olivia's imprisonment, William received a letter from his ex-wife. She had been following the news about Sophie's research from prison and wanted to meet with Sophie one final time. William's first instinct was to burn the letter, but Sophie, who had read it over his shoulder with her perfect memory, surprised him by saying, "I want to see her." "Absolutely not," William said flatly, "after what she did to you." "No, Daddy," Sophie said gently. "I remember every cruel thing Olivia said and did every single moment, but I also understand now that hurt people hurt people. Olivia was so angry and broken inside that she could only see what she didn't have instead of what she did have. I don't forgive her for what she did, but I want her to see what happened because she failed to break me." Dr. Morgan, who Sophie still saw monthly, supported the idea. Confronting Olivia from a position of strength and success might be therapeutic closure, but only if Sophie is absolutely certain. The visit was arranged for a Thursday in June. Sophie insisted on going alone with just her father, no lawyers, no press, no spectacle. Olivia looked older than her 35 years when she was led into the visitation room at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Prison had stripped away the glamorous veneer, revealing the bitter, angry woman beneath. When she saw Sophie, her expression flickered through a dozen emotions: surprise, shame, anger, something that might have been regret. "You've grown," Olivia said, her voice raspy from disuse. "I'm 10 now," Sophie said calmly, sitting across from her former tormentor with remarkable composure. "I'm in 5th grade. Jake is nearly 7 and in 1st grade. We're both doing really well." Olivia's jaw tightened. "I've seen the news. The miracle child who's curing Alzheimer's. Very impressive." "I'm not curing it alone," Sophie corrected. "Dr. Morales and her team are the ones who figured out how to synthesize what my brain makes. I just help by being different." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, Olivia asked, "Why did you come here?" Sophie looked at the woman who had terrorized her, and there was no fear in her eyes. Only a kind of sad understanding that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "I came because I wanted you to know that you failed," Sophie said simply. "You tried to break me and Jake. You tried to make us feel worthless and alone, but you failed. Jake is happy and healthy. I'm using my different brain to help millions of people. Daddy is the best father anyone could ask for. And Mommy's memory lives on in everything good we do." Olivia's face crumpled, and for the first time, Sophie saw real emotion beyond anger or manipulation. "I was supposed to have that life," Olivia whispered. "I was supposed to be Mrs. William Reynolds. I was supposed to matter." "You could have mattered," Sophie said. "You could have been a good stepmother. You could have honored my mother's memory instead of trying to erase it. You could have loved Jake and me instead of hurting us. You had choices and you chose cruelty. That's not my fault or Jake's fault or even my mommy's fault. That was your choice." Olivia started, then stopped. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. You were just a little girl, and I was a monster to you." Sophie nodded slowly. "I remember every single thing you did to us. Every word, every moment, every time you made us cry. I'll remember it perfectly for the rest of my life, but I also remember that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. My therapist taught me that." She stood to leave, then paused. "I hope you find a way to live with what you did, Olivia. I hope someday you can be sorry for the right reasons, not because you got caught, but because you genuinely understand the pain you caused. But whether you do or don't, Jake and I are going to be okay. We're better than okay. We're happy." As Sophie walked out of the prison with her father, she felt something release in her chest. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but a kind of peace with the permanent memories. "Are you all right?" William asked, pulling her close. "I am," Sophie said, and she meant it. "I think I needed to show her that she didn't win, that good things came from surviving what she did to us." 5 years later, Sophie Reynolds stood on the stage at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, accepting the Nobel Prize in Medicine alongside Dr. Patricia Morales. At 15 years old, she was the youngest person in history to receive the honor. In her acceptance speech, Sophie spoke about memory both as a neurological phenomenon and as a deeply human experience. I remember the worst day of my life with the same clarity that I remember the best day, she told the audience. My brain doesn't let me forget the painful moments, but it also means I can hold on to every good moment, every hug from my father, every laugh with my brother, every patient whose eyes light up when their memories return. Some people say my memory is a gift. Others say it's a burden. I say it's both, and that's okay. She paused, looking out at the distinguished audience. My mother, Catherine Reynolds, used to tell me that everyone has a purpose. It took me a long time to understand mine. I had to survive abuse, solve my mother's murder, and learn that being different doesn't mean being broken. But through all of that, I discovered that our greatest struggles often prepare us for our greatest contributions. Sophie's eyes found her father in the front row holding 14-year-old Jake's hand. Both were crying openly with pride. The treatment derived from neurotrophin 7 has now helped over 2 million people worldwide retain or regain their memories. 2 million families who don't have to watch their loved ones disappear into the fog of forgetting. 2 million people who can remember their children, their spouses, the moments that make life worth living. She smiled, and it was pure Catherine Reynolds, compassionate, strong, full of hope. I will remember every single one of their stories, every letter, every thank you, every tear of joy. When someone recognizes their child's face again, that's what my different brain is for, not just to study, but to witness and honor the importance of memory itself. To everyone who feels different, who struggles with the things that make them unique, your differences matter. They might be difficult, they might be painful, but they also might be exactly what the world needs. Don't hide them. Don't be ashamed of them. Instead, ask yourself, how can what makes me different help others? The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Sophie would remember every moment of it, just as she remembered every moment of her life, painful and joyful, tragic and triumphant, all woven together into the extraordinary tapestry of a life lived with purpose. That night in their hotel suite, Sophie sat with Jake, looking out at the lights of Stockholm. Her brother, who had grown into a kind, thoughtful teenager, put his arm around his sister. Soph, he said. He still called her that, just like when he was 3 years old. Do you ever wish you could forget the bad stuff with Olivia and everything? Sophie thought about this, accessing memories of cleaning toilets with Jake in her arms, of Olivia's cruel words, of the fear that had consumed her childhood. Then she accessed memories of her mother's laugh, her father's return that fateful afternoon, Mrs. Chin's kindness, Dr. Morgan's patience, Dr. Morales' excitement, Margaret Whitfield's tears of joy. No, she said finally, because if I forgot the bad stuff, I might forget why the good stuff matters so much. Every memory I have, good and bad, made me who I am, and I kind of like who I am now. Jake hugged his sister tight. I'm glad you remember, because you remember all the good things about Mom that I'm too little to remember myself. You keep her alive for both of us. And that Sophie realized was perhaps the greatest purpose of all, not just helping strangers retain their memories, but being the living memory keeper for the people she loved. Every story about Catherine Reynolds, every moment of her mother's love, perfectly preserved in Sophie's extraordinary brain, ready to be shared with her brother whenever he needed to feel close to the mother he'd barely known. As she fell asleep that night, Sophie Reynolds, survivor, scientist, Nobel laureate, and most importantly, daughter and sister, held one final thought with perfect clarity. She would remember this day forever, and that was exactly as it should be. 3 months after the Nobel ceremony, Sophie was back at Columbia University working alongside Dr. Morales on the next generation of neurotrophin 7. The initial treatment had been remarkably successful for early-stage Alzheimer's patients, but its efficacy diminished in advanced cases. Sophie was determined to find a solution. What if we combine neurotrophin 7 with a targeted delivery system? Sophie suggested sketching a molecular structure on Dr. Morales' whiteboard. At 15, she had already completed undergraduate-level courses in neuroscience and biochemistry through an accelerated program at Columbia. If we could encapsulate the protein in a lipid nanoparticle designed to cross the blood-brain barrier more efficiently and target the hippocampus directly, Dr. Morales studied the diagram, her eyes widening. Sophie, that's brilliant. The current treatment struggles with distribution throughout the brain tissue. This could solve that entirely. William watched from the doorway of the lab, marveling at his daughter. In the years since the first trial, she had transformed from a research subject into a genuine collaborator. Her perfect memory allowed her to recall every scientific paper she'd ever read, every experiment they'd ever conducted, every piece of data they'd ever collected. But it was her creativity, her ability to make connections others missed, that truly set her apart. Dad, Miss Sophie spotted him and waved him over. "We might have a breakthrough for late-stage patients. Come see." William crossed the lab, noting how comfortable his daughter looked in this environment, surrounded by microscopes and centrifuges and brain scans. He'd worried in the beginning that the research would consume her childhood. But Sophie had insisted on balanced school friends, hobbies, family time, while still contributing to the research that had become her passion. "Looks promising," William said, studying the complex diagram. Though he ran a pharmaceutical company, the technical details of neuroscience research were beyond his expertise, but he trusted his daughter's judgment implicitly. "If this works," Sophie said, her eyes bright with excitement, "we could help people who everyone else has given up on, people whose families have already started grieving for them while they're still alive." William felt a familiar surge of pride. His daughter's compassion had never wavered, never dimmed. Despite everything she'd been through, or perhaps because of it, she had developed a profound empathy for suffering and an unyielding determination to alleviate it. "I have no doubt you'll figure it out," William said, squeezing her shoulder. "But remember, you promised Jake you'd be home for dinner tonight. It's his birthday." Sophie nodded. "I wouldn't forget. I never forget." Later that evening, the Reynolds family gathered around the dining table in their Manhattan apartment. After the Nobel Prize ceremony, William had sold the Westchester mansion. Too many painful memories lingered there and moved the family to a spacious penthouse overlooking Central Park. Jake, now 15, was blowing out candles on a chocolate cake made by Mrs. Chen, who had remained with the family through all their transitions. "Make a wish," Sophie urged, smiling at her brother. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, then blew out all the candles in one breath. Everyone applauded. William said, cutting slices of cake, "How does it feel to be 15, Jake?" "Pretty much the same as 14, Jake grinned, "except now I can start thinking about getting my learner's permit." William groaned dramatically. "Don't remind me. I'm not ready for you to be behind the wheel of a car." "I'll be a good teacher," Sophie volunteered. "I remember every detail from when Dad taught me to drive." "That's what worries me," William teased. "You nearly hit a fire hydrant on your third lesson." "That was a tactical maneuver to avoid a squirrel," Sophie protested, laughing. As Jake opened his presents, a new telescope from William, rare birdwatching binoculars from Sophie, and a hand-knitted sweater from Mrs. Chen, Sophie found herself savoring the moment. These ordinary family celebrations filled with laughter and gentle teasing had once seemed impossible during the dark days with Olivia. Now they were the foundation of her life, the memories she cherished most deeply. The next morning, as Sophie prepared to return to the lab, she received a phone call from Detective Wilson. Though retired now, he had kept in touch with the Reynolds family over the years. "Sophie," he said, his voice grave, "I'm calling because I thought you should hear this from a friend rather than the news. Olivia Reynolds was found dead in her cell last night. Apparent suicide." Sophie sat down slowly on her bed. "How?" "She hanged herself with a bedsheet, left a note. The prison authorities contacted your father as her former spouse, and he asked me to speak with you." Sophie closed her eyes, accessing her perfect memory of Olivia's face during their prison meeting 5 years earlier. The bitterness, the regret, the emptiness. "What did the note say?" Detective Wilson hesitated. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yes, I need to know. It was addressed to you. It said, 'Sophie, I watched you accept the Nobel Prize on television. I saw what you've become despite everything I did to break you. You were right when you visited me. I failed, and now I can't live with that failure anymore. Some memories can't be fixed even by your miracle drug. Catherine 1. Sophie was silent for a long moment, processing this information. She felt no joy at Olivia's death, no vindication, only a profound sadness for a life so consumed by bitterness and envy that it had destroyed everything it touched. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said. "Will you let my father know I'd like to talk to him when he has a moment?" She found William in his home office reviewing documents from Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. He looked up when she entered, his face etched with concern. "Detective Wilson called you." Sophie nodded, sitting across from him. "I don't feel anything I expected to feel. Not relief, not closure, just sad." William set aside his papers. "That's because you have compassion, sweetheart, even for someone who doesn't deserve it." "Do you think she could have changed if she'd really tried?" William considered this. "I believe most people can change if they genuinely want to, but Olivia's entire sense of self was built around what she didn't have, what she thought she deserved. That's a much harder pattern to break. Sophie nodded slowly. I think I need to focus on the lab today, lose myself in the research for a while. Of course, do whatever you need to process this. Just remember, Dr. Morgan is available if you want to talk it through. Sophie smiled gratefully. I know, but honestly, I think the best thing I can do today is work on helping people keep their memories. It feels like the right response somehow. At the lab, Sophie threw herself into the new delivery system for neurotrophin 7. Working alongside Dr. Morales and a team of dedicated researchers, she found solace in the precise calculations, the carefully controlled experiments, the steady progress toward a solution that could help those with advanced Alzheimer's. Midway through the afternoon, a visitor arrived at the lab, an elderly man, accompanied by a middle-aged woman who Sophie recognized as Margaret Whitfield's daughter, Sarah. Ms. Reynolds, Sarah said, approaching Sophie with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry to interrupt your work, but my father insisted on coming to see you today. This is Walter Whitfield. Sophie looked at the elderly man with surprise. When she had first met Margaret Whitfield 3 years earlier, Margaret had explained that her husband's Alzheimer's was so advanced he rarely recognized family members anymore. Mr. Whitfield, Sophie said, extending her hand. It's an honor to meet you. Walter Whitfield, 81 years old, with a shock of white hair and clear blue eyes, took her hand in both of his. Young lady, I've been waiting a long time to thank you properly. When Margaret first entered your trial, I was mostly gone. I could see how much it hurt her when I couldn't remember her name. 53 years together, and I couldn't recall marrying her. His voice cracked with emotion. The treatment you helped develop gave me back my wife in her final months. We could talk about our children, our grandchildren, our life together. When Margaret passed away last month, I was able to be fully present with her, to remember our love story and share those memories with her as she slipped away. Sophie felt tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry about Mrs. Whitfield. She was very kind to me. She spoke of you often, Walter said, called you her memory angel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Margaret wanted you to have this, said it belonged with someone who understands the value of memories. Sophie opened the box to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young couple on their wedding day, Margaret and Walter, more than 50 years earlier. I can't accept this, Sophie said, overwhelmed by the gesture. Please, Molly, Walter insisted. Margaret was quite determined, and when she made up her mind about something, he smiled fondly. Well, I never could change it in 53 years of trying. Sophie carefully closed the locket and slipped it around her neck. I'll treasure it, and I'll remember both of you perfectly. That evening, as Sophie worked late in the lab, refining calculations for the new delivery system, she found herself touching the locket repeatedly. Each time she accessed her perfect memory of Margaret Whitfield, of the joy in the woman's eyes when she spoke of remembering her granddaughter's wedding, her husband's face, her daughter's first words. Those are the moments that matter, Sophie murmured to herself. The connections, the love. Suddenly, a new idea began to form in her mind, not about the physical delivery of neurotrophin 7, but about its application. She quickly pulled up brain scans from various Alzheimer's patients, comparing activity patterns in different regions. It's not just about the hippocampus, she realized aloud. It's about the emotional centers, too. The memories that resist degradation the longest are the ones with the strongest emotional connections. She began to sketch a new approach, a two-phase treatment that would first activate the amygdala and other emotional centers of the brain before delivering neurotrophin 7 to the hippocampus. By priming the emotional pathways first, they might be able to strengthen the effectiveness of the protein, particularly in advanced cases where cognitive connections had severely deteriorated. Sophie worked through the night, fueled by inspiration and the weight of Margaret Whitfield's locket around her neck. By morning, she had a comprehensive proposal for a new clinical approach that combined neuroscience with what she had learned from her own experience, that emotions-anchored memories made them more resilient, more retrievable. When Dr. Morales arrived at the lab, Sophie was waiting with pages of notes and diagrams. Patricia, she said, using the first name Dr. Morales had insisted on since Sophie became a colleague rather than a subject, I think I've found the missing piece for advanced cases. Dr. Morales reviewed Sophie's work with growing excitement. This is revolutionary, Sophie. You're suggesting we treat memory not just as a cognitive function, but as an integrated emotional cognitive process. Exactly, Sophie nodded eagerly, because that's how it actually works. My strongest memories, both good and bad, are the ones with the most intense emotional components. When I remember my mother, I don't just recall visual details or conversations. I feel the love, the safety, the connection. Those emotional anchors make the memories more robust, more complete. And in Alzheimer's patients, emotional memories often persist after other types have faded. Dr. Morales added, following Sophie's reasoning. That's why they might remember a spouse but not what they had for breakfast. So if we activate those emotional pathways, first prime the brain with those connections, and then introduce neurotrophin 7, we might be able to rebuild cognitive pathways using emotional memory as scaffolding. Dr. Morales finished. Sophie, this could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. The development of what became known as the Reynolds-Morales protocol took another 18 months of intensive research, rigorous testing, and careful refinement. Sophie, now 17, divided her time between the lab, completing her accelerated undergraduate degree, and maintaining a semblance of normal teenage life, though there was little normal about being a Nobel laureate before getting a driver's license. The first clinical trial for advanced Alzheimer's patients began on Catherine Reynolds' birthday, a date Sophie had chosen deliberately. 20 patients with late-stage Alzheimer's, people who had lost most cognitive function and recognition of loved ones, received the two-phase treatment. Sophie insisted on being present for every treatment, on meeting every patient and their families. She wanted to know their stories, to hold their histories in her perfect memory, to bear witness to their journeys. The results exceeded even their most optimistic projections. 82-year-old Edward Miller, who hadn't recognized his wife Eleanor in over a year, looked up after his third treatment and said, "Ellie, is that you, sweetheart? Where have I been?" 78-year-old Maria Santos, who had stopped speaking entirely 6 months earlier, began to sing a lullaby she had sung to her children decades before, the words perfectly recalled in her native Portuguese. 69-year-old Robert Chen, the youngest patient in the trial, and a former concert pianist, sat at a piano for the first time in 2 years and played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major from memory, his fingers finding the keys with the muscle memory and emotional connection that had survived when his cognitive recall had failed. By the 6-month mark, 18 of the 20 patients showed significant improvement in memory, recall, cognitive function, and emotional recognition. The remaining 2 had stabilized, showing no further decline itself, a remarkable outcome for such advanced cases. The scientific community was electrified. Medical journals published special issues devoted entirely to the Reynolds-Morales protocol. Neurologists from around the world traveled to Colombia to observe the treatment firsthand. The waiting list for the expanded trials grew to thousands within weeks of the initial results being announced. On the anniversary of the first treatment, Sophie visited the clinical ward where the original 20 patients continued their recovery. Edward Miller, now able to live at home with Eleanor again, had returned for his checkup and spotted Sophie in the hallway. "There's my memory angel," he called, using the same term Margaret Whitfield had coined years earlier. "Come here, young lady. I have something to show you." He proudly pulled out his wallet and began showing Sophie photographs, his children's graduation, his 50th wedding anniversary, the birth of his first grandchild. "I remember all of them now," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Not just the faces, but the days themselves, the feelings, the joy." Sophie smiled, touching the silver locket she still wore every day. "Those are the memories that matter most, aren't they? The connections, the love." Edward nodded, tears in his eyes. "You gave me back my life story. There's no way to repay that." "You don't need to," Sophie assured him. "Just keep making memories worth keeping." That evening, William hosted a small celebration at the Manhattan apartment for the 1-year anniversary of the protocol. Dr. Morales was there with her husband, along with Dr. Morgan, Mrs. Chen, and a few key members of the research team. Jake had insisted on cooking dinner himself, a skill he'd been developing over the past year, and the apartment was filled with the aroma of his slightly ambitious attempt at coq au vin. "To the Reynolds-Morales protocol," Dr. Morales said, raising her glass, "and to the extraordinary young woman who made it possible." Sophie blushed, uncomfortable as always with direct praise. "To all of us," she countered, "and to the patients brave enough to participate." William watched his daughter with quiet pride. At 17, she stood on the cusp of adulthood, poised and confident, yet still refreshingly humble. Her childhood had been stolen by tragedy and abuse, yet she had emerged not just intact but luminous, a beacon of hope for millions. After dinner, as the guests chatted over coffee and Jake's somewhat lopsided but delicious chocolate souffle, William pulled Sophie aside onto the balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of Central Park. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small package. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Sophie opened it to find a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. Inside, on the first page, was a photograph she had never seen before, her mother, Catherine, holding newborn Sophie in the hospital, gazing down at her with pure adoration. "I found this when we were moving," William explained. "It was in a box of your mother's things I hadn't been able to go through after she died." Sophie touched the photograph gently, committing every detail to her perfect memory. "She looked so happy." "She was. The day you were born was the happiest of her life." William paused, his voice thick with emotion. "The journal was hers. She kept it during her pregnancy, with you writing letters to you about her hopes and dreams for your future." Sophie carefully turned the pages, reading her mother's elegant handwriting, absorbing every word with her perfect recall. Catherine's voice seemed to flow from the pages, warm, loving, full of the excitement of impending motherhood. "My dearest Sophie," one entry read, "Today I felt you kick for the first time. A tiny flutter like butterfly wings. Your father pressed his hand to my belly and waited so patiently for you to do it again. When you did, the look of wonder on his face made me fall in love with him all over again. He's going to be such a wonderful father to you. And you, my little one, are already so loved. Whatever path you choose in life, know that we will support you, guide you, and cherish every moment of watching you become whoever you are meant to be." Sophie looked up at her father, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for this. It's the most precious gift." William wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "She would be so proud of who you've become, Sophie. So proud of how you've used your gift to help others, how you've turned pain into purpose." "Do you think she somehow knew?" Sophie asked softly. "That I would be different, special?" William considered this. "I think mothers have a way of seeing the potential in their children before anyone else does. Not the specific path you take, perhaps, but the capacity for greatness that was within you from the beginning." Sophie leaned against her father, clutching her mother's journal. "I wish she could have been here for all of this." "She is in a way," William said gently. "In you, in Jake, in every life you've touched with your work, in every memory you've helped restore. Her love for you set everything in motion." That's a kind of immortality, isn't it? Sophie nodded, finding comfort in the thought. She would never forget her mother, not a single detail, not a single moment they had shared. And now with this journal, she had new memories to add to her perfect collection, new insights into the woman who had given her life and indirectly her purpose. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Jake had finally admitted defeat in his battle with the mountain of dishes, Sophie sat alone in her room reading every page of her mother's journal. Each entry was now preserved in her perfect memory alongside all her other recollections of Catherine Reynolds. As she closed the journal, Sophie's hand went to the silver locket around her neck, Margaret Whitfield's gift. She opened it, looking at the tiny photograph of Margaret and Walter on their wedding day, young and full of hope for the future they would build together. Sophie had spent years focusing on the burden of remembering everything, every painful moment, every loss, every struggle. But tonight, surrounded by her mother's words, her father's love, her brother's determined culinary efforts, and the knowledge of all the lives she had helped restore, she felt the true gift of her condition. She would never forget a moment of joy, never lose a second of connection, never misplace a single expression of love. Her perfect memory wasn't just a scientific curiosity or even a medical breakthrough. It was a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, to the power of love, to outlast pain, to the possibility of finding meaning in even our greatest challenges. Tomorrow, Sophie would return to the lab, continue refining the protocol work toward helping even more patients. The research would go on. But tonight, she simply sat with her memories, the painful and the precious alike, and felt gratitude for all of them. For they had made her who she was, led her where she needed to be, and connected her to countless others through the shared experience of what it meant to remember. In the quiet of her room, Sophie Reynolds, memory keeper, closed her eyes and whispered the words that had become her personal mantra: remember everything, forget nothing, find purpose in it all. And she would, perfectly, for the rest of her life.